Welcome to our continuation with a series on community. Before I get into the message today, I want to just draw your attention to the wall on your extreme left-hand side. This is our verse for the year that we are hoping to help get into our hearts and minds, and in bits and pieces, we're going to try and explain how we can actually put that into reality and actually add some steps and some skills to that. But reading from Ephesians chapter 4, verse 16, that's referring to Jesus, makes the whole body fit together perfectly. The body's referring to the parts of his family, parts of the body of Christ. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow. Or to put it a slightly different way, as each part does its part, it helps the other parts grow. Think about that for a moment. As you and I and others, as we each play our own part, we help the other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy, growing, and full of love. That is God's vision and heart for his body, the church, the capital C church, which is global, as well as the small individual, the millions of individual expressions of that in terms of small C churches all over the world. It is his heart, it is his desire, as Sue mentioned from Matthew 28, that as people are being made or grown into disciples of Jesus, that we are growing whole, healthy, full of love, which means that community is so much more than just a sentimental thought. It's so much more than just creating a nice sort of social environment. It's not less than that, but just bear with me. It is not less than that, but it is so much more in that it's iron sharpening iron. There's a sense of strength to it. There's a rigor to it. There's a almost as though like strands of muscles are formed together to be able to carry something, carry purpose. I really do believe that the fulfillment of community in the biblical sense of the word will lead to us all growing in our devotion, formation, and mission. Devotion being our relationship with God, actually enjoying a life-giving, growing, personal, day-to-day experiential relationship with God. Formation makes reference to who we are becoming. God wants us to become the healthiest, best, strongest versions of who he's designed us to be. We're all becoming someone. He wants to lead us into becoming someone on purpose and intentionally. And community is a part of that, how we learn and grow and we bring our different gifts and strengths. And to grow in community, mission is for us to actually partner together in advancing God's heart, God's purposes, God's plan for the world. Community is so much more than just a nice, cute, sweet, attractive, sentimental sort of gathering together. It has a strength to it. And so last week I took a look at one of the attributes that I think is so significant in us actually growing in relationships with those closest to us as well as those that are further away from us. And we took a look at how significant it is to grow in learning to listen, being curious, being willing to recognize that we don't know what we don't know. And I made reference to this quote by David Augsburger where he says that being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person they're almost indistinguishable. And I think that we can grow in this discipline of learning to hear people because we care, because there's a healthy curiosity. But there's also another part to this. And so even though it is so important that we are learning to listen, learning to be curious, being sure to use the listening and the speaking in the ratio of our ears to our mouth. We have 2 ears, 1 mouth, and we're supposed to use it in that ratio, the cliche goes. We used the verse last week and we are sticking with it again today from James chapter 1 verse 19 where it says, "Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen and slow to speak." And of course, slow to get angry. Today I want to take a look at the speaking. But if you weren't yet for last week, I would encourage you before you get excited about speaking, which if you're excited about speaking, you probably need to slow down a little bit. If you're like, this is my opportunity to go and tell someone where they're going wrong, you're missing the heart. So if you weren't here last week, I'd encourage you to download the podcast or to go onto YouTube and to watch last week's section. But I want to talk about if we are to speak, if we are to address something. I'm not talking about everyday, ordinary conversations and shooting the breeze. I mean, like if there's a meaningful, significant conversation to be had, that we do take that as an appropriate responsibility if we are in relationships with people. I kind of ended off last week taking a look at how some of the things that we need to take into account if we are going to respond, that we need to consider our credibility and our responsibility and their receptivity. So, do I actually have credibility with this person? Do I have any responsibility over them? And the truth is, there are very few people that you actually have any kind of responsibility over. And do I have, or are they receptive? Are they actually open to hearing what I have to say? And again, that's going to depend radically on the relationships that you have. If you're a parent of a 5-year-old, you don't necessarily have to wait for them to be receptive if they're about to hurt themselves, okay? But if you have a meaningful friendship with someone and you're noticing a pattern that you're concerned about, not from a cheesy, gossipy kind of way, but from a real burden, you care for them kind of way, then you got to ask yourself, do I have credibility with them? Is there any kind of responsibility? Which, if they're a close friend, I would say yes. There's an appropriate responsibility. If I love someone and I'm noticing something that maybe they're not noticing, I think that there is an appropriate responsibility. Certainly, if you are in a marriage, there's a mutual responsibility. If you're in a local church context, maybe you're visiting today, maybe you belong to another church. If you're in a local church context, there is a healthy, non-controlling, non-manipulating, a healthy level of responsibility for leaders to serve and lead and love the people that they're entrusted with. There's an appropriate responsibility. But then also we want to consider, is the person receptive? Because maybe you've discovered that not everyone is receptive. Have you ever noticed how some people like thank you for feedback and others want to punch you in the face? How some people are completely open, and even though it might be a difficult thing to hear, they're grateful, and then others are completely defensive and they turn it on you, and maybe the blame game begins. Maybe you've noticed this at work or at school, where you kind of notice, if you think about it, a pattern where some of your colleagues or some of your fellow students are just quick to take appropriate responsibility, or their life could be on the line and they still wouldn't take responsibility. Isn't it amazing how we have different attitudes, different mindsets when it comes to receiving feedback? Now, not all people are equally receptive. I want to take a look at 3 categories. The first one will be the longest, second will be short, and the third one will be like a blink and it's done. Henry Cloud, who's a very well-known psychologist and a Christian psychologist and a coach to significant CEOs and COOs of some pretty large global businesses, I found him incredibly helpful over the years. In one of his books, Necessary Endings, he talks about how you'll, generally speaking, and he hates oversimplifying it, but he says, generally speaking, from an attitudinal point of view, from a receptiveness point of view, he says he generally finds that people fall into one of 3 categories: the wise, the foolish, and the evil. The wise, the foolish, and the evil. And to be fair, that language is actually from Scripture. You'll see some verses in the book of Proverbs and in the book of Psalms and in some other places where people are referred to as the behavior or the traits of if they're foolish, if they're wise, if they are evil. Now, the reason why I'm wanting to use slightly different language is because I think that we can misunderstand what those terms are referring to. So we could misunderstand those that fall into the wise category, assuming that they're the smartest person in the room. And yet, sometimes the smartest person in the room, and again, maybe you've experienced this, you're like, you're so bright, how can you be so dumb? Hey? Where you think, how do you think like that? Or why are you so resistant to feedback? Why? But they're smart, they're gifted, charismatic. And so it could be misleading if we're just thinking in terms of smart, not smart. It's not that. It's actually about an attitude. It's about a heart attitude, a mindset. And so I'm simply referring to terms like the humble, the proud, and the harmful. The humble, the proud, and the harmful. The humble are teachable and wise. The proud are unteachable and what Henry Cloud would call a fool. And the harmful, or what he would call the evil. In some cases in the book of Proverbs, it'll make reference to the mocker. But the core issue with someone that's evil is that they've actually given themselves over to wanting to hurt you. It's not unconscious. It's not subtle. Like they actually want to do damage to you or to a group of people or to an organization or even in some cases to a church. Now, Henry Cloud makes the following observation, that if you are a responsible and loving person, you may assume that other people are like you, responsible and loving. You assume that they do the right thing, taking responsibility for themselves where necessary and for their mistakes and for their work, and that they care about other people and how their actions affect those other people. And then he goes on to say, that's just not the case. Some people are like that, others are not. And basically, he's actually speaking more in the context of organizations and businesses where he's saying you may need to be discerning as to whether or not this is someone that you can continue to journey with long term. And he's making reference to hope and to trust. And he's saying that if you are wanting to have a reason for hope, wanting to have a reason for trust, you need to see evidence that this person is humble and teachable. Are they humble and teachable? If they are, well, then they're going to be learners. They want to keep growing. In fact, I would argue that if you are a godly leader of any kind, you are a learner. It used to be a long time ago the statement that leaders are readers, but it's so much deeper than that. Leaders are learners. Leaders want to learn, expose themselves, grow, glean from others. Like we know that we don't know what we don't know, and so you put yourself into positions, you expose yourself to content that helps you to actually identify things that you don't know, or you expose yourself to people. There's a leader friend of mine who I was talking with earlier this week where I was saying, I actually feel like I need to arrange for him to almost come like as a secret shopper type of thing on a Sunday. Just a cap and glasses. Hopefully no one will notice him. And just be objective, because I don't know what it's like to come here as a new person. Some of you arrived as visitors today, and you know what it's like. You know if certain things are clear or unclear, if the general atmosphere was warm and welcoming or cold and offish, if it seems like people are distracted and cliquish, and so I know that I don't know what I don't know. And so I need to expose myself, maybe painfully so, to others that could make observations, make suggestions. It's to be humble, to be teachable. It's to accept our limits and weaknesses. To be humble is to know that you're not strong at everything. You're not great at everything. How on earth do you function on a healthy team without recognizing that you have limits and that others have strengths? That's just obvious. But that actually requires humility. A humble, teachable person is going to, sometimes out of sheer discipline, fight against being defensive. Even if everything in you is like, this is hurting right now. You because you want to learn and grow. You are looking, even if you don't like everything that's being said, even if you don't agree with everything that's being said, even if you don't like the way the person is saying it, you're looking out for even the tiniest bit of truth. God, is there anything that you're actually wanting to show me through this uncomfortable or painful observation? That is humility. We are slow to make excuses, slow to blame other people. I'm not saying that when it is legitimate that you can't appropriately discuss various responsibilities if there are responsibilities that are being placed on you that are not yours. But generally speaking, your first default is where might there be truth? You're not quick to just defending, excusing, and blaming. Humble, teachable people see the truth, take it in, and make adjustments. They want to learn. They want to grow. In fact, they are grateful for feedback. They don't just fake it. I mean, like they're actually grateful. Hey, this is a learning opportunity. Whew, sure is hurting, but I think that's true. I think that's true. God, help me to actually pay attention to this particular thing. They are grateful for feedback and for the opportunity to learn and grow. And so the idea there is to think, if you're having that kind of conversation with someone that you have credibility with, responsibility for, and there's an appropriate receptivity, well then think in terms of guidance and resources and help and encouragement. I would offer these very simple tips if talking to someone. And again, we're not talking superficial stuff. I mean, like, if you actually have the right and responsibility to have a meaningful conversation, I want to remind you that clarity is kindness. Be clear. I spoke last week about the last 10%. Don't just give the 90%. If it's a meaningful conversation, chances are the magic is in the extra 10%. The real gold, okay, not magic, don't get freaked out. The gold, the nuggets, the stuff that matters the most could be in the last 10%. And so, see, you might not want to cause discomfort for someone, but you could actually be doing them a disservice, and you could be unkind if you're not being appropriately clear. Where it just remains vague and hazy. And I could be wrong, but I don't think that Christians are great at this. I think Christians, it's weird. Christians kind of fall into two extremes, I think. This is my opinion. It's those that are so cautious not to want to offend or hurt anybody, which and generally speaking for good reason. And then there are those that are excited to give you bad news. And that's a bit weird too. There should be this tension, right? So in fact, even in Ephesians chapter 4, if you carry on reading that passage, it talks about sharing the truth in love. Some people get excited about the truth, others just want to camp out in the love, but there's actually truth and love. Truth and love is what makes us a friend to someone's future, not just a friend to their feelings. So clarity is kindness, and obviously we need to check our hearts. Am I reacting out of anger and aggression, or am I actually motivated by love? Because being right is not enough. And so we want to check our tone, our body language, our words. We want to consider our timing where possible. Is this a good time? Again, this is not referring to someone that's about to jump in front of a car. I mean, if there's a meaningful, thoughtful conversation that has to be had, try and get your timing right. And then be honest if you're not sure. There have been occasions where I feel like I'm noticing a pattern in a relationship that I have credibility with and some responsibility with, but I'm not 100% sure if that's an accurate assessment or what the source of it is. And so it's okay to be unsure and to say, hey, I'm wondering if this is maybe hurting you, but I'm wondering if this is affecting you in a negative way. I'm wondering. It's okay. It's okay to wonder. All right, that's the first category. The second category is what I would call the proud, or what Henry Cloud and parts of the Bible call the fool. That is those that are unteachable, and pretty much they are the opposite of everything that is the attitude of the humble. So they don't take feedback well. They're not desperate to learn from mistakes. They tend to be full of blame and excuses. Be careful, because anyone that's within firing distance will kind of probably take the blame. I wasn't given enough resources, this person wasn't kind enough, this one didn't ask me enough, this one wasn't clear enough. And again, there could be elements of truth in that, but if you are responsible for something, you are willing to take responsibility. They, in some cases, in really bad cases, they won't even accept the facts as truth, because if they did, then that means that they would have to make adjustments. And so the temptation is to actually try and change the truth so that they don't have to change. And so they change the narrative. There are some politicians around the world that I think might fall into this category, but I'm going to exercise some self-control. Again, the proud, the fool, could be the smartest person in the room. In fact, in some cases, that could even make it harder to be teachable and to be humble. Maybe they have a very sharp mind. Maybe they have a lot of charisma. Maybe they're able to compel and convince. We're looking at an attitude. Are they teachable? Are they approachable? Are they willing to change? And in this case, what Cloud recommends is that you you get to a point where you stop talking. You've tried to have the conversations, you've tried to offer feedback, again, assuming that you have appropriate responsibility in this relationship, nothing's changing. And so, in his opinion, you need to stop talking and think boundaries and consequences. Hey, we've spoken about the risk you place us in when you drink and drive. I'm not, you get to drink, that's your choice, but we're not going to be driving with you. We're going to be calling a friend, or we're going to be organizing an Uber. Or if you keep spending like that, we're not going to be able to fill in the blank. Or if you're going to keep expressing yourself with that level of aggression, or if you're going to keep being abusive, hey, it's your choice. You own you have agency, but we're going to protect ourselves. There are consequences. In a work scenario, it's a case of, and in South Africa, obviously, we have very strict and in some cases helpful labor laws where there's a lot, you're given every possible opportunity to improve and to grow. But even there, if you're not taking the opportunities, there are corrective measures and in some cases even dismissal. So stop talking, think boundaries and consequences. Again, clarity is kindness, check your heart tone, body language, words, consider your timing. Be honest if you're wondering. But also, I would add in this case, if you don't have to, don't burn bridges. It's possible that maybe someone changes. It's possible that maybe you might say, hey, I'm moving out because of the risk to myself and to those I care for. But if you get help, if you make changes, well, if there's enough of a track record, we can start talking again. If possible, don't burn bridges unnecessarily. Then, the last category is the harmful. These are people, as I said earlier, that are actually consciously wanting to hurt you, your family, your business, your church. They are wanting to hurt parts of the community. And in this case, he's saying, don't even begin the conversation. There's nothing that you can do that's actually going to cause this. There's nothing that you can do to talk this person into changing. In this case, he's saying you actually need to you need to think in terms of protection. How do you protect yourself? How do you protect those that you care for and are responsible for? And in some cases, that might involve a restraining order, that might involve law enforcement, that might involve attorneys. But he's saying, whatever you do, think in terms of protection. Now again, people can change, but even then, and that could be rare once they are that far gone, but even then, people need to earn trust. People need to show a track record. I can only think of very few cases over the years, like 28 years of doing this full time. I can think of very few cases in this congregation, in other congregations, of where we've said to the person, like, there's nothing else we can do. You're actually a threat to this community. I think there was one person in this context years ago where they were genuinely, because there was an unwillingness to get help, to change, they were actually a threat to people that, in this case, they were actually underage. And so we would be foolish and naive and reckless if that person just came back and said, hey, sorry, let's move on, and we just started over again. No, there would need to be evidence, significant evidence, compelling evidence of life change. Fruit in keeping with their life change. Does it make sense? Yeah. Okay, now, I know that this sounds very judgerach, okay? Sounds like we're judging people, right? And in 2025, the J word is probably worse than the F word. Am I right? Now, I think that I understand why that is, and depending on your definition of judgment, I would agree. If we are talking in terms of to judge someone is to condemn them and to malign them and to abuse them, that's completely unhelpful and is not our responsibility. But I think that in terms of how the Bible makes reference to judging, I think that great synonyms are words like to evaluate, to assess, to calculate, to weigh, to discern. There are things that we need to judge every day. Again, you're not going to call an Uber and he arrives drunk out of his mind or high out of his mind and you're like, hey, I don't want to be judgmental, so I guess you can drive me home. I think you'd fall into the foolish category, right? That is to evaluate. Now, you evaluate the person's state of mind and the heart and the fruit. You're looking at evidence and you're saying, this is going to be dangerous for me. There is an appropriate level. Every time you get to a road, get onto, you're about to cross a road, it is appropriate to judge the traffic. If you're going to join a church, it is appropriate for you to assess, to judge, to evaluate. Certain non-negotiables about the health, the integrity, is there fruit that these people love Jesus and love people and hold the Bible with the appropriate level of authority and integrity. If you're going to form friendships with people that gives them influence over you, it is really important that you evaluate if you're heading in the same direction. That's a biblical thought and scripture. Hey, if you're not walking in the same direction, you can't go together. Yet there are times where people perhaps carelessly have gone into business with a partner where effectively their livelihood, their future, their family is dependent on this partnership, but there hasn't been sufficient judgment, sufficient evaluating and assessing. Do we have the same core values? If you are courting, dating, checking out, Arsene, I believe you have a girlfriend. I would imagine. Is she here? Because that determines what I say next. I'm assuming she's not here. Okay. Arsene. That's your fault, man. If you are dating, there should be an appropriate level of assessment. Because there is no single relationship that will influence your life more than who you marry. I have seen it help, hurt, and in some cases totally rip people's destinies from them. Who you marry matters. So there's an appropriate level of evaluation. It's not healthy to condemn someone saying, hey, you're a loser, peace out, I want nothing. No, that's I just mean you need to evaluate. You need to judge whether or not this person, whether or not you're going to be life-giving for one another. Are you going to keep God at the center? Is it going to be iron sharpening iron? I can honestly tell you, before the Lord, listen, it's probably a miracle that Sue and I stayed married, and no, wait. I don't mean that. No. We were young. We were a little bit dumb. There was so much that we didn't know about each other, about ourselves, etc. But I can honestly tell you that the single thing that gave me the most hope and has continued to give me the most hope, because there's no guarantee, by the way. I hope that's not surprising to anybody. There's no guarantee. So what you're building on is hope, and you need a reason for hope. My reason for hope is that God's opinion trumped everyone else's opinion for Sue. God's opinion trumped her opinion, God's opinion trumped my opinion, and it was the same for me. And so because for both of us, he's at the center, like it really mattered. I could have my thoughts or feelings, she could have hers. What does God want? Because of that, we could work through all kinds of immaturities. We could work through insecurities. We could work through incompatibilities in those early years. So when I say it's a miracle, I don't mean for 25 years. I mean for like the first year or two. I never thought of divorce, but I'm pretty sure that Sue... Actually, she might not... Actually, she'll say she didn't think of divorce, she thought of murder. But what gave us hope was... Like there was an assessing. I saw evidence and fruit. There was an assessing of God. God matters to Sue. God's will trumps everything else. That is a level of judging and assessing. If you're a parent of young kids, there's an appropriate level of assessing who their friends are, who's influencing them. Not if they're 37, but if they're young. Guys, to say, no, we don't want to judge. I'm like, are you actually out of your mind? Like, that is abdication. That should almost be criminal. You have a responsibility to a vulnerable child that is in your care. Of course, there's supposed to be an appropriate level of judgment. Now, having said that, the church has got a terrible reputation at large, at least as far as perceptions go, about judgment, and again, mostly because it'll be seen as condemnation and shame and that kind of thing. And so I want to just read a couple of passages to you that I think helps clarify our levels of responsibility. 1 Corinthians 5, verse 1 and 2 is Paul writing to a bunch of Christians. So please bear in mind, he's writing to followers of Jesus in the city of Corinth. He says, I can hardly believe the report about the sexual immorality going on among you, something that even pagans don't do. I'm told that a man in your church is living in sin with his stepmother. Now, everyone under the age of 13 or 12, you can close your ears. He's saying, you've got someone that's having sex with his stepmother. And you're feeling cool about this? You're feeling, I mean, if it was in 2025, like, you're so tolerant, you're so amazing, like, you feel good. No, he's like, are you mad? You're so proud of yourselves, but you should be mourning in sorrow and shame, and you should remove this man from your fellowship. Eugene Peterson, in his Message paraphrase, puts it this way. I also received a report of scandalous sex within your church family, a kind that wouldn't be tolerated even outside the church. Okay, that's changed a little bit. One of your men is sleeping with his stepmother, and you're so above it all, it doesn't even faze you. Shouldn't this break your heart? Shouldn't it bring you to your knees in tears? Shouldn't this person and his conduct be confronted and dealt with? Now, let me carry on in case you start panicking. Further down in that same chapter, he goes on to clarify further, because it's not the church's job to judge everyone on earth or even down the road. Listen to what he says as it goes on. When I wrote to you before, this is 1 Corinthians 5, verse 9. I told you not to associate with people who indulge in sexual sin, but I wasn't talking about unbelievers who indulge in sexual sin, or are greedy, or cheat people, or worship idols. You would have to leave this world to avoid people like that. He's making it clear. Hey, you Christians there in Corinth, it's not your place, it's not your responsibility to judge people that are not saying that they're following Jesus. I meant that you are not to associate with anyone who claims to be a believer. Because to claim to be a believer means that you're assuming that there's an immediate trust and credibility and that we're in agreement. So anyone that claims to be a believer yet indulges. Now, again, that word's important. Every single one of us sin. Probably, I imagine every one of us have probably sinned in the last 24 hours. If you just look at heart attitude and thoughts. The difference that I believe he's talking about is when people are living a lifestyle where it's an unrepentant way of life. Again, just in case this isn't clear, if you've hit puberty, you have I don't know how you haven't faced temptation, at least in your mind and heart, towards sexual sin. Okay? So this isn't about one category. No, this he's talking about people that are actually indulging in this. Indulging in sexual sin. Or greedy. A far more sociably acceptable lifestyle, including in churches. Or worships idols, or is abusive, or is a drunkard, or cheats people. Don't even eat with such people. It isn't my responsibility to judge outsiders. He's making it very clear. But it certainly is your responsibility to judge those inside the church who are sinning. God will judge those outside, but as the scriptures say, you must remove the evil person from among you. So I want to be clear, and this is where it's so weird to me when people, like when Christians are spending a lot of time judging people that they have no responsibility for, and none judging themselves first and foremost, and then assessing in a life-giving, constructive, helpful, loving way those that they are in relationship with. And so we can spend so much energy on stuff that has nothing to do with us and actually ignore our appropriate responsibility. One more passage, Matthew 7, verse 15. Quentin, you can come up, Salon. This is Jesus speaking towards the end of his Sermon on the Mount as recorded in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. He says, beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep, but are really vicious wolves. So he's talking about spiritual leaders. In our context, Christian leaders. He says, hey, beware. And then he goes on to say, how? Which means that we have to evaluate, we have to assess. He says, you can identify them by their fruit. That is, in case that's not clear, by the way they act. You can pick grapes, can you pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? A good tree produces good fruit and a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. So every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. Yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their actions. And this is the thought I had. Because he's, in this case, he's speaking about false prophets or false teachers or false priests, pastors, whatever you want to call it. And again, I think that a healthy application is to say anyone that we are allowing to influence us, anyone that we are looking to actually inform us, to form us. And the thought struck me that we need to beware of the trees from which we eat our fruit. And I think that we need to think of this particularly in the context of media and friends. I think sometimes we are surprised that we are eating from really toxic roots, and then we wonder why our thinking is so different to what we read in Scripture. Beware the trees from which you eat the fruit. This might seem like a silly example to you, but I've mentioned before that one of my default ways of sometimes just relaxing or release, just wanting just to switch my brain off is to watch particularly like cop series, and I read books at night about assassins and all kinds of like weird stuff. It's fiction. Anyway, now not so much the books I read, because that's normally okay. But some of the series I watch, like I don't know about you, but I can get worked up a little bit when the series shows someone that's like really done like some terrible things to people, and you want them to catch them, which is appropriate. Like there's an appropriate sense of justice. But I'm okay if they go a little bit beyond justice sometimes. Like when they arrest them, but there's like a little bit of, there's a little bit of street justice taking place at the same time. Where my people at? You know what I'm talking about? Now that's in terms of, like, because you are being, if the series is doing well, they're getting you invested, right? They're getting you worked up about this. And then you want justice. You're like, listen, you don't want to hear some of the stuff Sue says. Not swearing. Like, if it were me, I would. I won't tell you what she would do. But like, you're like, I don't mind if they want to pull out a couple of fingernails or break a few bones, Okay. Now, that's with entertainment. For me, there's even a fine line with news. Like, I've got to be so careful with news because there's so many things that are happening in our world or happening in our country that can really rile me up. Anyway, here's my point. If I am eating from a whole bunch of fruit that is actually not so much justice, but more vengeance oriented, should I be surprised that when I'm listening to the story of someone that's being hurt by a family member and where kids are involved, should I be surprised that part of me actually wants some street justice instead of actually trying to discern God's heart and God's way? And does this make sense? Guys, we need to be careful. We need to judge and assess who we're listening to. What podcasts, what news sites, for your average person under a certain age, they are formed far more by a TikTok reel than by the Word of God. Because it's just there, and it's attractive, and it's engaging. So beware the trees from which you eat fruit. There's an inappropriate way to judge, and there is an appropriate way to judge. Agreed? Yeah. When you stand to your feet, please. In a moment, I'm going to get you to reflect. Because it's very tempting for us to hear a message like this, and chances are you've already had people in your mind. Yeah, he's proud. Yeah, she's evil. But we need to actually reflect for ourselves. Because truth be told, the only person that I have full responsibility for is me. I have a certain level of responsibility to my family, my friends. I have a certain level of responsibility over the people that consider this their church home. But the only person that I'm fully 100% responsible for is me. And so I want to encourage you to reflect for a few moments on whether or not hopefully you're reflecting with God. Are you humble and teachable? Am I humble and teachable? Is there evidence of this? Is there fruit of this? Are people able to have tough conversations with me, knowing that even though it might be uncomfortable, I'm willing to engage and consider? Not in an unhealthy way, but in an appropriate way. Do I have a thick skin and a soft heart, or do I have a very thin skin and an oversensitive heart? Am I quick to blame and defend? So am I proud? Am I unteachable? Am I constantly looking to make excuses? Do I turn it on someone that I'm actually in a relationship with when they're trying to offer some feedback? Am I trying to like one up them? Well, you fill in the blank. Or am I willing to hear and receive? And lastly, I'm not going to ask if you're evil, because truth be told, you wouldn't think so. You wouldn't care, and that's okay. So if you're even worried, that's a good sign. But I will ask you this, to reflect on whether or not you're harmful. Are you harmful to other people? Are you someone that says things to other people that consistently breaks them down? Do your choices and the way you treat people, does it, like, if you think about it, it's actually quite conscious. You're consciously doing harm. Now, here's the good news. Scripture tells us repeatedly that God gives grace to the humble. It also tells us that He opposes the proud. He gives grace to the humble. He opposes the proud. God leans in when we're saying, God, I think I need to do better at receiving feedback from certain people. Or even just looking for the goal, looking for some element of truth. God, I need help in being less defensive. Or God, I've been making excuses for my harmful behavior. I've blamed my genetics. I've blamed my generational family tree. I've blamed politics. I've blamed Donald Trump. I've blamed every man and his dog. I've got to stop making excuses. I need to recognize that I'm doing harm to people. So can I encourage you just to close your eyes for a moment? And if you're willing, just to open your hands as a posture of humility and surrender, just saying, God, is there anything that you're wanting to bring to my attention right now? And as you're doing that, I do want to encourage you that God leans into truth. God leans into reality. God doesn't shame you in reality. God's like, hey, welcome. He can only meet us in reality. He's not looking to condemn and shame. He's looking to lead us out of, invite us from that which is destructive, that which is harmful. I've often got to ask myself the question, what difference does Jesus make to this message? Because truth be told, a lot of messages without that extra 10% could really just be common sense and in some cases even self-help. But the difference that Jesus makes in this is that He loves us. We can be secure in His love. We can be reassured in His love. It is only as we find security in Him, our identity in Him, that we find freedom in Him, that we stop trying to prove ourselves to everybody, that we stop trying to be something that we're not, that we are increasingly free to acknowledge weaknesses, limits, things that we need to grow in and mature in. And it doesn't feed shame. It actually excites us because we are secure in Jesus. Another difference that Jesus makes is that, and this is hard for us to fully understand, but when we allow Him to come into our lives, to forgive us of our sins, and when we choose to follow him, in theological terms, the Bible tells us that the power of sin, there's a spiritual power attached to sin, that the power of sin, which means we have no control, no choice. We are bound in sin. The power of sin is broken. What Jesus did at the cross as he died and rose back to life again, it wasn't just a physical act and it wasn't just a cool story. He broke the power of sin. That's the difference that Jesus makes. And that allows us to be humble, teachable, to be willing to grow.